Good morning, RASI. This is Dave Downs here. I'm speaking with Brian Smith, our compliance director. Brian, it seems like we just did one of these a month ago. Great to see you again.
It sure does. Thanks for
Right.
having me back.
Yeah, man. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good. Lots of stuff going on. PPP loans, which we talked a lot about last time. This particular podcast, we're going to really focus on the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, or RRF, as it's most commonly referred to. We're going to talk about some of the usage, what is eligible to be able to use this grant, who qualified, how many folks. It's going to be a really kind of interesting conversation. And I appreciate your time today, Brian.
Thank you.
Jumping right in, RRF is out of money, right?
Unfortunately.
The funds have gone dry. But at this point, how many restaurants benefited from the program?
Well, according to the SBA, the RRF provided $28.6 billion to more than 100,000 restaurants, bars, and other businesses that provide on-site food and drink. So, a lot of restaurants in the country.
100,000. That's pretty
Yeah.
impressive number. 28.6 billion is a huge number too. But there's got to be quite a few stories out there where folks didn't get the funds. Any idea on how many did not get funded from this type of program?
Yeah, that's a tough number to calculate, but while Congress created the RRF to provide relief to restaurants, that's the business sector extremely hard hit by the government imposed shutdowns and
Mhm.
other restrictions related to the COVID pandemic, right? Everyone knew the demand for the funds would be far greater than the supply. I mean, that's
Yeah,
just the way it was,
common
you
sense. Yeah.
know. But according to the SBA, more than 278,000 applications were received by June 30th, and those applicants were seeking more than $72 billion. And remember, there was only 28.6 billion available. So,
Wow.
so many more restaurants applied than could be given a grant, of course. The SBA closed the program and stopped accepting applications on July 2nd, but less than 10 days after the SBA launched the RRF portal, and that was on May 3rd, the applications submitted equated to more than twice the amount of funds available. And that was in
Wow.
10 days. I mean, so it was, there was a lot of need and not a lot of funds.
Still somewhat successful though, in that over a third of the people that applied did get some funds out of this, and maybe we're a little bit overfunded, or at least able to get through that. So it's at least some sort of encouragement there. For
Absolutely.
Yeah, for the restaurants that did receive the RRF grant funds, excuse me, it's kind of a little tongue twister there.
say
What
it,
are
yeah, say
what
it
are
5 times fast,
I
right?
will not. Yeah. What are some of the eligible expenses? What restrictions do recipients need to be aware of? How can we help provide some training wheels on how to use this funds?
That's a great question. So some of the eligible business expenses are payroll, which
Okay.
includes health insurance and,
Oh,
and
nice.
stuff like that. Not taxes, but health insurance. Payments on business mortgage, both principal and interest, but it doesn't include any prepayments. You can't pay ahead. Rent payments, same thing. You can pay your rent, but you can't pay it ahead. And then we also have business debt service, your loans, both principal and interest. Once again, doesn't include any prepayment. Utility payments, maintenance expenses. If you wanted to construct an outdoor seating, that was actually listed as one of the
Hmm.
eligible expenses. I think right now that's a good thing to do to expand your business to outdoor. Some other ones, business supplies, protective PPE, personal protective equipment, cleaning
Sure.
materials, covered supplier costs, same definition under PPP. So that's food purchases. Um, and then day-to-day business operating expense, kind of a catch-all. And some examples would be but by no means is this a complete list, just some examples. Legal expenses, marketing expenses, insurance, business licenses, shipping fees, and then equipment. You want to put in a new hood or a new grill, new fryers, anything like that is going to be an eligible RRF expense. And, some things to keep an eye out for. The wages paid with RRF grant money cannot be claimed as wages for purposes of the ERTC or PPP forgiveness.
No double dipping.
Exactly. Exactly. And then the other expenses paid with RRF grant money cannot be claimed as non-payroll expenses on the PPP forgiveness application. Like you just said, no double dipping.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think that's really interesting on the prepayment, where a lot of people would probably try and do that to help weather the upcoming few months, and Delta variants and some of the concerns throughout the different parts of the country, and having another kind of outbreaks going on. It's interesting to note that prepayment, but a pretty extensive list of things that they can use this for. So that's encouraging too.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's great. With the PPP and ERTC, I know we're focusing on the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, the RRF, but not being able to double dip like you just explained. What's the time frame that they have available to use these RRF grant funds?
The RRF covered period actually began on February 15th of 2020 and ends on March 11th, 2023.
Wow. Okay.
Therefore, the recipients have until March 11th of 2023 to use their grant, unless the business has permanently closed. And then when they permanently close, that's the end of their covered period.
Got
so
it.
they can't pay expenses past the time that your business was permanently closed and have those eligible for the RRF. And while past due expenses are eligible, because you notice that covered period began in 2020,
Yeah.
be careful not to use payroll costs that were claimed on the ERTC eligible wages or forgivable payroll expenses on the PPP forgiveness application for the RRF.
The way I look at that, it really extended date range to use the funds out to 2023 even. They really should be looking at this as future assistance to be able to help take care of things. Use up those PPP and ERTC funds first, and then go into the RRF if you received it, right?
You hit that, absolutely. You hit that nail on
Perfect.
the head.
Let's see, payback. These RRF funds, are they required? Is anybody ever going to be required to pay back any portion of these funds, or are they really true grants?
Well, recipients are not required to repay the funding as long as those funds are used for eligible uses no later than March 11th. Recipients that are unable to use all their funds received on eligible expenses by the end of the covered period must return any unused funds to the Treasury.
Understood. And that was March 11th, 2023, right? They have to use all
Yes.
those?
Yes,
Cool.
sir. So like you said, let's get through 2021
Mhm.
with ERTC and PPP, and then, look at 2022 to start using your RRF grant, and, maybe even towards the end of 2021, you start using that because most restaurants across the country are getting back to 100% capacity at this point.
Yeah, and I really look at a really good way, as you mentioned, kind of the end of the year for those folks that are located in colder weather, the ability to maybe put on an extension to your patio, or really cover that in some fashion, and be able to provide heating so you have outdoor dining. So if we move away from full capacity indoors in any markets, you have ability to still see people. That's a huge opportunity there.
For sure. I agree 100%.
Reporting. So I know that's always kind of a detail thing. A lot of questions we get. What kind of reporting requirements do the RRF grant recipients need to know about?
Well, first thing is that no later than December 31st of this year, 2021, all recipients are required to report to the SBA how much of their RRF grant has been used and against each category. They want to know, $20,000 payroll, $10,000 for my utilities, and so on and so forth. But if the recipient fully expends their funds prior to December 31st, they will be asked to certify that proceeds have been used on eligible expenses at that time, and they would not be required to report anymore. But that's only if they used all their funds by the end of this year. And then the applicants that do not fully expend their RRF grants prior to this year will be required to complete annual reporting submissions until they fully expend their grant funding over the covered period expires. And our RASI's financial statements are a great tool to keep track of these and measure them.
Perfect. I've only got one more question because this has already been super helpful. The RR grant money, is that taxable? And are these expenses deductible on their year-end corporate taxes?
Well, according to the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, the amounts received from the SBA in the form of a restaurant revitalization grant shall not be included in gross income. So they're not taxable,
Okay.
and the expenses incurred are deductible. So it's the same treatment as PPP forgiveness. Very beneficial to taxpayers.
Allow me to nerd out a little bit, Brian, and I know you're going to put me in my place and correct me, but I want to make sure I understand this from a financial statement perspective. That means they're recording the loan funds that they received on the balance sheet because it's not recorded as income on the P&L, but all the expenses do get put on the P&L so that they can deduct those correctly on their taxes. Am I nerding out the right way?
You're very close. The income, the RRF is not a loan, it's a grant, and it would flow from the balance sheet as it's used to the income statement. But when it hits the income statement, it's not taxable. The business owner is not going to pay tax on it, but they get all the same benefits from that income that they get from taxable income, meaning it increases their basis. It does give them positive cash flow, but they just don't pay tax on it.
Pretty amazing.
The best kind of money. That is free money because they're not paying tax on it.
That is an amazing part of the American Rescue Plan Act, or the ARPA, if we're going to use all these acronyms here. So I really appreciate your time today, Brian. Anything else we need to know about the RRF funds and that you want to make sure we get out on the table today?
Not that I can think of right now.
Brian Smith, always a pleasure to talk compliance and in all the legalities and legislation coming down. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Dave.
Cheers, Brian.
Take care.